In this video, we're going to talk about the parts of all plants. We're going to talk about roots, stems, and leaves. Now, I thought it'd be easier if I printed a picture so that it would be a little more understandable about what these three main parts of plants are: roots, stems, and leaves. So I'm going to give you a second to pause the video, jot down the definitions for roots, skip a couple of lines, stems, skip a couple of lines, and then leaves, and then we'll talk about each of them when we come back. So go ahead and pause the video. We'll come back in just a minute. All right, roots are going to be valuable to a plant because, as it says in the definition, a system of absorbing nutrients and water. Now, here's a great picture of a root system. If you've ever tried to pull a root out of your yard, it always seems like it has lots and lots and lots of roots to it. This is where you're going to absorb water. And the main part that you need to know from this is the absorption of water and nutrients. The hard part for a plant is not just getting the water that's going to be used in photosynthesis that we talked about in the last video. It's getting that water from the soil up to the top part of the plant, up to leaves, through the stems. So basically, water and nutrients are going to come through the roots, up the stems, and to the leaves. So you can imagine for a very, very tall tree, it's going to have a lot of roots because that plant needs lots of water. It's going to have to go up the tree to the leaves. And then the opposite sort of takes place, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk first about roots. All right, and we'll come back to this picture in a second. Here's a picture of a very detailed picture of a root. Now let me zoom in here for a second. When a plant first starts to grow, you'll have a root tip. And you'll notice that in this picture, there are all kinds of cells. Let me open my pen. All kinds of cells right here. This is the fastest growing part of a root. What is going to happen is these cells right here are reproducing themselves, and as they produce new cells, they push the root tip downward into the soil. So it's this root tip that pushes through the soil, and into these cells is where you will absorb water, and as it needs water, it will push deeper and deeper into the soil to find more and more water. Water can be absorbed into these sides as well, but it's these cells right here that are all crammed together in this picture are where cells are reproducing the fastest. And as they're reproducing very, very fast, they will push that root into the soil. So when a seed opens up and it has its first root, that first root really tries to get down into the dirt to get as much moisture so that it can keep itself alive. So this is what's called the root tip, and that root tip has all kinds of cells that absorb. Now sometimes you'll even see some roots that have these little hairs that come off of them. And those little hairs that come off of them allow even more room for absorption. Now different roots have different things on them, but these little root hairs allow more and more water to be absorbed, and so the plant is growing at the root. Now, let me take an example of something that is a root that maybe you even eat that will give you an example of how it works. Let's take an example such as this. Here's a picture of a carrot. Okay? Now we're going to talk about these two words right here in just a second, and we'll define them on the next page. Let's look at the picture real quick. A carrot is basically a root. You can see in this picture all these root hairs that I was just talking about that stick out of the side of it to absorb water and nutrients. Now, here is where it's really important. You may want to jot down an easy sketch just like this with a carrot and the arrows going up. The very first thing I want to talk about are cells, are tubes called xylem. That's how that's pronounced. You'll notice in this picture on the left-hand side, it's showing water moves up xylem. So what happens is when it absorbs water through these little hairs, the waters are pulled up the carrot to keep the plant alive. So basically, you're trying to pull water to the top of the plant. And when you pull water to the top of the plant, that's what's going to keep the plant alive. The water cannot just stay in the roots. So it's going to be pulled up to the top. Now, the very important thing you need to know is this: xylem is about water. It's about water. Now you'll notice in this picture as water comes up to the leaves, it says water lost to the air. Plants lose water to the air all the time. That's why they constantly have to bring water out of the soil. You and I do the same thing. As we breathe out all the time, we're actually breathing out moisture. On a very cold day, when you see what looks like fog coming out of your mouth, or people say, I can see my breath, that's actually water vapor. We lose all the time. Plants do the same thing. They lose water, so they constantly have to pull water up the plant to keep this top part of the plant to be alive. So you can imagine if it was a very big tree, the roots, the tree would be way up here, and those roots would have to bring the water all the way to the top to keep the top part of the plant alive. So there are these tubes inside all plants called xylem, and they move water. Then there are ones called phloem. Phloem are all about food, and that's going to make it easy to remember. Xylem is about water, phloem is about food. It's all about food. Now, in a plant we talked about in the last video, photosynthesis, plants make their own food. Well, where does photosynthesis take place? In the leaves. Photosynthesis takes place in the leaves. Now, why does that make sense? Because they're green and they're above ground. The roots do not do photosynthesis because sunlight doesn't get down there. And so you're going to have the leaves producing the food. So water comes up the plant and food goes down the plant to keep this part of it alive. So the food flows down the phloem into the rest of the plant to keep it alive. Now, you may want to jot down a couple of things down here that might be helpful for you. But the main idea is xylem is about water, phloem is about food. So one is doing this and the other one's doing this all the time. They're passing each other. Now, are they the same tubes? No, they're not. The xylem is pulling water to the top at all times, while phloem is taking the food down into the other parts. Both are trying to do the same thing and keep the plant alive. So this carrot is a really good example. You see the blue arrows going up. It might be a little harder to see the yellow arrows, but they're going down. So xylem is for water, phloem is for food. So food is going to move down the plant to keep all of the plant alive. Now, definitions that might be very helpful to you. There's the actual definition, so you may want to pause the video and write that down. And so going along with what we were just talking about, phloem is about food, and xylem is going to be the moving of water, okay, to allow water to rise in the plant. Now, the picture you see right here is a root that they've cut and put under a microscope, and they're showing you where the xylem and the phloem are. You'll notice they're different colors. The phloem is out here, so that's for the food. Xylem is on the inside. So when somebody takes, for example, and carves their name into a tree, well, you know that the phloem's on the outside. You can actually kill a tree if there's too much carving on it because you're interrupting the food movement within the tree, or at least right there you are. And as you're interrupting the food movement there, that could actually affect the plant. That's why you might actually have dead spots. Dead spots show up on that tree. But the plant always has to have water. Okay, so you can tell those are in the inside. You can almost see the rings on the inside as well. And the rings come from layer after layer after layer. As that plant gets bigger and bigger and bigger, as it grows taller and taller and taller, they make more and more xylem and phloem. So when you look at the rings on a piece of wood, that's actually what you're seeing. All right, so here's what we've done. We've talked about roots. Roots are the system of moving nutrients, water, and we actually talked a little bit about the leaves. The photosynthesis, the leaves are actually going to take the food, run them down the phloem that we just learned, and it's going to run down the plant. The stem is the part that most of us see on a tree. It would be covered in bark or it'd be a tall plant. This is where all those tubes are that run up and down that plant, and it says it supports the body. That keeps it standing straight up and down. All right? So roots, stems, and leaves. All right? Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in detail is I'm going to talk about the leaves real quick. There's a special part of the leaf that you need to make sure you write down. And this is called the stomata. So you may want to pause the video and sort of draw this picture, and I'll come back and explain it. All right, on the back side of a leaf are these things called the stomata. And basically what happens is, on the bottom side of a leaf, you'll notice it's green here, there are these little pores or little holes. And this is where gases go in. Carbon dioxide goes in because it needs carbon dioxide. And when a plant produces oxygen, the oxygen will come out. So basically, carbon dioxide goes in, photosynthesis takes place inside the leaf. When oxygen's made, oxygen is let out for you and I to breathe. Now, plants have to really control how much water they lose, and we saw that a while ago on the carrot. And what happens is they can actually, this guard cell, which is this big, looks like a bean on both sides, it can actually close up and let less water come out. When there's a drought, plants start to close off the stomata so that they don't lose so much water. If there's lots and lots of rain in the area, then it opens up and allows more carbon dioxide in and more oxygen out, but it can actually control the gases that come in and out, and also the amount of water. This is a really important part to know of a leaf. It's this control of the leaf that lets gases in and gases out for any plant. And it's on the bottom side of the leaf. In the next video, we're going to talk about the differences between types of plants and see if we can tell the difference.